Good afternoon. My name is Craig Carroll, and I'm here with the Conference Board for a special webcast on creating space for race-based discussions at the executive level. I am the executive in leading the Communications Institute for the Marketing and Communication Center at the Conference Board. Today, we're going to be looking at 4 questions today with 2 special guests. And the questions that we're going to be examining today are, number 1, how are companies discussing systemic racism and racial equality at the executive level? What are the range of responses companies are taking in terms of calls for action? How are they measuring and reporting on their commitment to change, reflecting on milestones and reporting? Number 3, what are some actionable steps that companies can take today to advance their work to dismantle systemic racism? And then 4, how can companies be held accountable for their silence, vague aspirations, reported progress, and leadership? And to join us today, we have 2 special guests. We have Jennifer Hunter, the Senior Vice President for Corporate Citizenship at Altria Client Services, and Michael Sneed, the Executive Vice President for Global Corporate Affairs and the Chief Communication Officer from Johnson & Johnson. Jennifer, Michael, thank you for joining us here today.
Great to be here, Craig.
Great. Thanks for joining us. So I just want to do a little bit of a setup here. Part of where we've been for the past couple of months. We started this series about 2 or 3 weeks ago in response to George Floyd's death, and I will say my personal experience was seeing Charlene Wheelis's video on the Arthur Page Society's channel about how companies needed to speak up and address how their employees were dealing with in the workplace. And then one of the other aspects that I've seen in the past few weeks is from Laisha Ward, the EVP of External Affairs from the Target Corporation, who shared some guidelines, some basic strategies for dealing with anti-racism and how we can develop strategic perspectives inside of organizations. And so for me, that was sort of the backdrop leading into this discussion here. So what I would like to do here is open the floor up here with just a basic question and give you both the opportunity to speak. So the question I'm going to start with is first just reflecting on your personal story and your passion for racial equity and for social justice. So Jennifer, I'd love to hear your story. We'll start with you. Sound? Let's turn the... Jennifer, I'm not sure if we have the sound on. Yeah, I can now, yes.
Okay, all right, fantastic. Well, I just want to say thank you for inviting me to be part of this conversation. I do think it's very important that you're having it and others have been as well. Quickly, just about my story, I have found myself talking more about my background than I probably am comfortable. But I grew up in the suburbs of Chicago in a predominantly white neighborhood. My family and I were one of 3 black families at my elementary school. It really wasn't until middle school, high school, that I was in a more diverse school environment. I was a competitive gymnast. I'm not going to date myself, but I will tell you gymnastics, when I was competing, is not as diverse as gymnastics is today. The sport has really progressed a lot. Went to the University of Wisconsin, had a roommate that never had met a black person before. At that point, there were some people whose experience with black people really was the Cosby Show and the Huxtables. And so had a great college experience, graduated with a degree in journalism, started with Philip Morris USA right out of college, and really experienced a lot of success. And really got to a leadership level early in my career, early in age. And so as I thought about my experience and I approached this work, most people know I show up as Jennifer. I know I'm black. I know I'm female. It's not like I haven't had obstacles. It's not like I haven't experienced microaggressions. But I'm Jennifer before I'm anything else. And as we started to have more conversation about diversity and inclusion at work, I realized being just Jennifer wasn't enough. I really needed to do more to lean into being black, to lean into being a woman, really understanding different Black experiences at the corporation and being more of an ally and an advocate in order to help make progress. So I also have a personal side. I've got 2 boys. They are teenagers. As I think about this world that we live in today, you know, there are moments I worry for them. As we've had this recent unrest, there was a moment where I was up at 2 o'clock in the morning, not comfortable having my boys out playing soccer the next day at their high school. So I say to folks, we often carry these invisible backpacks. No one knows what we carry with us all the time. And I think this moment that we are in is giving us an opportunity to have more authentic conversations. I chose to be part of this discussion because I want to be part of an authentic conversation and help really create the change that's necessary in the unique role that corporations can play. So that is part of my interest and the energy that I have right now in this conversation, is that I think corporations are uniquely positioned to make an impact. And I want to do that here at Altria, and I want to do that for the communities where I live and work, and make a difference both for my colleagues across the company, the community I live, and frankly my children, and making sure they have the opportunities that I think all young people should be afforded.
Thank you. Michael, I hope you can hear me. It looks like I'm frozen on screen.
No, I can hear you loud and clear. Craig, hopefully you can hear me as well.
Yep, we can.
Very good. So yeah, thanks for the question. Yep, thanks for the question. And again, like Jennifer, really glad to be part of this conversation. Let me begin by telling you a bit more about my journey and why I've been engaged personally in this story my entire life. As a kid, I grew up and went to school in a diverse Chicago neighborhood, so very similar to Jennifer, both from Chicago. I grew up in a particular time of unrest, so I'm a little bit older than Jennifer, so I actually remember the riots of 1968 in particular, and that has really always been seared into my memory. But as a teenager, I spent summers and weekends working at the nursing facility that my grandparents had founded on Chicago's west side. And I really watched them be very engaged in opening their arms to every person that walked through that door, and really creating a place of acceptance and inclusion and hope, and early on understanding the impact that individuals can have on their own community. And so that certainly left a big mark for me. And as I went through high school and ultimately college, I really became enamored with being part of healthcare because so many members of my family were involved in healthcare. And so after, as I was finishing up college, I decided to apply for an MBA. And at the time, my mom actually saw an advertisement in Black Enterprise magazine. At that point, there were only magazines. There was no internet or anything. And it was a scholarship that was sponsored by Johnson & Johnson to really focus on their effort to bring and attract more people of color into the organization. And so with the help of Johnson & Johnson, I went to graduate school, and I had an opportunity to spend 2 summers doing internships with the company. So after graduating, I was fortunate to have a number of offers, but chose J&J because of my experience, and really armed with my degree, but actually very little experience. I really did come ready to contribute to the organization, and yet I knew that I wanted to have and continue to have a connection to and with people who had guided me throughout my early journey, who also looked like me. And I tell the story that when I came to J&J, I used to keep a list in my wallet every black director and vice president that I would encounter. And at the time, it was a very, very short list. So I could really count the people probably on one or two hands. But I knew that J&J was very committed to this journey, and most importantly, committed to me and helping me move throughout the organization, which I've been fortunate to do. As I sit here today, that list is thankfully much longer. But it's not to say that we don't, as an organization and certainly as a society, have still a long way to go. That being said, I'm very inspired by the commitment to the company. I know that, and we'll get into it a little bit later, but I know we've had a lot of great conversations around what do we need to do to double down even further, and understanding that clearly the role of corporations sitting here today versus 50 years ago is very, very different. And corporations have a very strong voice, and they can use their strength, their scope to really help and support systemic change moving forward. So I'm incredibly inspired by not only what I've been able to do, but what I've been able to help J&J do in my career.
Now, what I've noticed is that both of you have lifelong stories in terms of your careers with your companies, right? That you've been there for quite a period of time.
We do, and that's I sometimes think of myself as a dinosaur in that regard, but it really is. It's a wonderful thing, and I'm sure, like Jennifer, it's not something you plan on doing. It's really about making sure that you're committed to yourself in terms of getting opportunities, getting challenges, and continuing to grow both personally and professionally. And fortunately, I've been able to do that all in one company.
Now, it's a testament to both organizations, right? That certainly speaks to the volumes there that you've been able to find that path there. So reflecting back, where do you think we are now when you look back on the 1960s and the civil rights protests and earlier exercises of Black Lives Matter? How does this moment feel right now? Do you think this time is different? That's for both.
Jennifer, you want to start?
Well, you started by saying that you had more direct experience, so I will defer to you.
Well, what I mean by, and look, I wasn't that old, but I will say that one of the lasting memories I have as a young boy was the 1968 assassination of Martin Luther King, and I actually, to be honest, I didn't know. I was young. I didn't know who that was, but it was one of the first times I'd seen my mom cry, and I asked her why, and then she went on to explain what was taking place. And then, of course, you would see the images on TV. And what I took away then and what I take away now is back then, even at the age of 8 or 9, I was struck by the fact that the protests seemed to cut across all racial and social economic variables, and it was quite broad. And when things started this year, I noticed the same thing. For the first time in a long time, there was a tremendous amount of racial and social and economic diversity that, frankly, I had not seen since the 60s. So that actually signaled to me that somehow this was different, and that people who normally wouldn't either participate or, frankly, wouldn't even think about the unrest that had been going on, something sparked it, whether it was a confluence of people being home because of the pandemic and being able to all experience the video, the horrific video that folks saw of George Floyd. It was definitely a spark that I had not seen, frankly, in over 50 years. And so that has given me real hope that this time there can be real change, much as what happened in the 60s and the resulting legislation around the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act and so many other things from a legislative and from a social policy perspective.
Okay. Well, at this moment, we're going to open it up for the audience to answer that question. We're going to ask the audience real quick, how does this moment feel in terms of previous moments? Can we pull that question up for the audience to see on screen? So the question is, how different does this moment feel today compared to previous moments around Black Lives Matter? Less significant than previous movements, about the same as the previous Black Lives Movement, more significant than the previous Black Lives Movement. And the results are still coming in. Over 250 have said more significant. So we at least have 300 on the call. And we also have the chat match coming in to match it as well. And we'll give you 5 more seconds. I think that's enough time. So let's see the results here. I think the audience should now be able to see the results. 94% say more significant than previous Black Lives Matter movements, and only 6% say about the same. So that's pretty significant. Let's now turn to the second question and look at how companies are speaking out. How has your company responded in the past 60 days? Okay. Spoken out internally, spoken out externally, but not internally, and spoken out internally and externally. So far, the results are coming back pretty similar to what we had a couple of weeks ago, where we asked companies to speak out about, or to address the question of whether their companies were speaking out more now, or about the same, or less than they had in previous times. And Michael, that's a survey question and Jennifer, that's a question you have seen from me on previous studies. And what we found was overwhelmingly the number of companies that this was the first time that they had spoken out on social issues here. Okay? Yeah. I'm going to go ahead and share the results right now at this point and broadcast the results. So we have 70% who've spoken out internally and externally, and then 26% who've spoken out internally, and only 2.6% that have spoken out externally but not internally, and 4% are not responding. Still, those are pretty telling that they're speaking out internally and externally. And some of our survey results from other studies has shown that one of the reasons that companies are speaking out externally is that their employees are asking for it, right? That it's not enough to speak out internally, that one of the proof points is when they actually see the words match from their companies outside of their organizations as a way of holding them accountable. So that said, we're going to open up our session, and we can take these survey results down, and we're going to reflect on the question of what types of conversations are going on, right? So our session is creating space for race-based discussions at the executive level. So I'm going to ask you both, Michael, I'll start with you. What kind of discussions are happening at your company today in terms of addressing systemic racism and structures that support it?
Yes, Craig. So obviously, the last several months have been really horrifying and difficult. I would say, unfortunately, for many of us, it's not surprising. I think internally, we've been doing a lot of soul searching, quite honestly. I think most importantly, the first thing we said is we need to listen. Companies, oftentimes they want to act right away and make a statement. And I think we, as a leadership team in particular, we had to ask ourselves some pretty hard questions, like why aren't we further down the road in terms of our own journey around racial equity at Johnson & Johnson? And frankly, what changes do we need to continue to make to advance diversity and inclusion right here within our own company? While we're pleased, as we would say, with progress, we're certainly not satisfied by any means. Like a lot of companies, we have had a long-standing commitment to diversity and inclusion. I talked about that earlier. But I do think, we have realized that this is a pivotal point, given the recent racial events in this country and frankly around the world, and that it's really, I think, put a white spotlight on the racial and social injustices that plague the society, and it really, I think, compels us to do even more. And particularly, I think if you're part of Johnson & Johnson or you know a little bit about J&J, you know that we very much focus the work that we do around our credo. It was crafted in 1943. It talks specifically about this notion of including and providing an inclusive work environment for people. Everyone needs to be considered an individual. Their diversity has got to be respected and recognized. But again, that's a set of words on a document, and it's about people. And as humans, we often fail to live up to the aspirations that we all have. And I think what we've been trying to do is to understand how do we start to double down and make even more real the aspirations that we have around racial and social equity at J&J and across, by the way, across the organization, from the highest levels of the organization right on through. And so I know that every member of our executive committee is really going through that exercise to identify the concrete steps that we can take to improve diversity and inclusion within our overall organization, and to make sure that we are committed to that. People who are more cynical perhaps than I am will say that it's just words and it is about action, and I would say that I agree. We're at a point where words are not enough, that we have to take action. They have to be bold action, bold steps, and our stakeholders need to hold us accountable. And we've understood that, and that is what we're committed to doing as we go forward.
And I would say,
I like how you identified listening as one of the first actions.
I was going to say it's a
Jennifer,
similar
please, let's hear
conversation that we're having here. But part of what makes me proud about this moment, so the question about, for me, it's less about the civil rights movement and the Black Lives Matter movement that we see today, but when I see the responses and the number of people that are saying it's more critical today, there are more companies that are speaking out. We had a moment, we're located in Richmond, Virginia, and Charlottesville, University of Virginia, is 60 minutes east of here. And so when we saw the events unfold in Charlottesville, 3 years ago in August, we had an internal conversation. And, we listened to our colleagues. We really wanted to understand how people were feeling. We really began to have a series of courageous conversations led by our inclusion and diversity colleagues, as well as our employee resource groups. And frankly, our employee resource groups have really done a lot to move the conversation forward in a way that has been very productive and helpful. But we didn't speak out externally in 2017. And so I think about where we are today. And again, the conversations about diversity and inclusion, I think every company is rightly focused on diversity in the boardroom, diversity in the C-suite, diversity in the pipeline, making sure you're hiring diverse talent from diverse locations, and holding ourselves accountable for progress. But I think, as we refer to it as a pandemic within the pandemic, and Michael talked about maybe it's because people were at home and were willing to go out and lend their voice to this moment. But I think part of what happened is during the pandemic, you had people Oh no, my computer just shut down. I can't see my screen. Hold on.
We can
Okay,
still
good.
hear you.
All
See
right.
you.
Just so I can't see you anymore.
Well, we see you.
But what ended up happening is we started having conversations with folks that you wanted to understand, how are you doing right now? You now are inside of people's homes literally because everything that you're doing is remote and through video and whatever system you're using, but you see people's family, you see their, their pets. I mean, they just become part of your everyday. And so you actually begin to practice care differently, and you're asking how people are doing. And so when we saw the death of George Floyd, and, as it was a horrific thing to see, and you saw people, Black employees in particular, really experience trauma. And while we had had a lot of conversations, you do get to the point where you don't want to talk anymore. You want to act. And we had one of the most powerful conversations it was the beginning of June, and it was so well facilitated, and people had the opportunity to share their experiences. And what I think began to happen is when you are telling your story, and I talked about what's in your invisible backpack. We all carry an invisible backpack. But if you don't have a safe environment where you feel as though you can tell your story and have a different level of understanding. So when Michael says at J&J they started really listening, we started listening, but we were hearing differently. And you were hearing the pain. You were hearing of the Black experience outside of our walls and beyond. And I think there was a real desire to do something different than we had done before. So I'm very proud of the steps that we took. We had an external communication. We had an internal communication. We've been hosting a number of conversations with Black employees to really understand the experience, how we can make it better. I think we are very clear as a leadership team led by our CEO that this is a leadership commitment. We just had a conversation this afternoon, but we've talked to the organization, we've heard their ideas, and we've all concluded we can't talk, we have to do. People are looking for action. What we are building from, though, is we had just introduced in March, prior to the pandemic and people working remotely, we had just introduced a set of new inclusion and diversity aiming points. And those aiming points really focused on having gender parity, having at least 30% ethnic diversity across our most senior levels in the organization. And so we are building off of a strong foundation, but it now gives us the opportunity to really take a step back and say, are we focused on the right sets of strategies that really will drive change? But the conversation about race is different because race is something growing up, that's something that you wouldn't talk about. Well, now it's front and center because we're having a very different external conversation about race, and we're having that conversation inside. And one of the things that I think is really important is humility and understanding that there are experts in inclusion, diversity, equity, and we need to understand that we are at the beginning of a learning journey. We are going to learn more about what we can do to drive progress inside of our walls and outside. But I think one of the most important things we do as we lean into solving problems externally is making sure that our insides and outsides match. Because we don't want to find ourselves in a situation where we're making a lot of progress outside and in our community, but yet when you look inside of our four walls, people feel as though we've not made as much progress. So I think the commitment is significant. We will hold ourselves accountable. We will report on progress. And I know that we will make a positive difference.
So it sounds like it's not just a tight window that you feel like we only have this moment. It sounds like internally it already feels like this is permanent and we're taking some concrete steps to move forward and keep the momentum going. Yeah. Michael, what about you? What are some things that you're doing?
Let me just build on a couple of things Jennifer said. I do think it's important that we look internally and externally. So we are looking through all of our metrics and objectives in terms of our D&I objectives, and we actually publish those in half of the last couple of years on our Health for Humanity report. So there's a lot of transparency there, which again is the first step. And I think coming out of this, we will be even more transparent in terms of the specific goals that we have internally. I think externally as well, one of the things that we've actually done, so again, it's about listening first and then having the conversations, which I think, like Altria, we've had some incredible, at times very raw, very emotional, very honest conversations. And it's been across the organization with obviously our Black and African American colleagues, but our white colleagues as well, and our Hispanic and Latinx colleagues and Asian colleagues. So there's an allyship there that I think we're building. There's also a level of education, quite honestly, that needs to happen. So as part of that, what we've done is we've actually formed a racial and social justice strategy and program initiative. It really is very focused on how do we integrate all the things that we're doing, both internally and externally, so that we can develop a very clear plan and a strategy that promotes racial and social justice, both to J&J's internal as well as our external audiences. And we are very, I think, intent on understanding where we can be great partners, but also understanding what do we have that's uniquely our capability. And so we've laid out, I would say, six or so key areas, including policy. What are the things from a policy perspective that we want to lead on, whether it's legal justice reform or prison reform, where can we partner? What do we want to do from an economic perspective? Again, as a large company, we have the ability to impact a lot of other minority-owned and women-owned businesses. Today we're very proud of the fact that Johnson & Johnson is one of very few companies that's part of the business, the billion-dollar business roundtable, where over $1.5 billion of our spending goes to businesses that are owned by women and people of color. But what else can we be doing in that space from an economic perspective? And of course, healthcare. That is our sweet spot, and we are and have been, I think, a leader when it comes to healthcare disparities. And what do we need to do to double down in that area? Because we know that COVID-19, as an example, has been disproportionately impacting Black and brown communities in this country. And so what can we do to continue to backfight and make sure that as we get treatments, as we get a vaccine, that the access is there for those communities first and foremost. And then, as I said before, what are the other education and training initiatives that we can really lead to make sure that people understand what the history of racism and oppression has been in this country, and how do we get other people to understand this unique experience and why they should be part of the team that ultimately moves us forward. So that is that's kind of a number of the things that we're very focused on. I'm the executive sponsor of that steering committee, and we have business leaders from across the organization have been part of it. And I think that's the kind of level of support and frankly heft that you need to keep these things going. So it isn't just a flash in the pan. And once the headlines subside and people move on to other interests, that these are the things that we'll continue to be fighting for day in and day out.
Okay. So both of you are giving great examples of taking action and listening first before communicating, and making sure that there's a sense of alignment in terms of what's happening externally with internally. And I think we all recognize that not every company is at the same level and at the same point on the journey. So what I want to ask is, looking at the record number of companies that are speaking out right now in terms of Black Lives Matter, they're pledging support one way or another. Some are not speaking out, okay? Others are keeping their heads in the sand, and some are using a term that was used in Harvard Business Review this morning was woke washing, right? The using of language from advocacy for corporate purposes. So these are raising all kinds of questions about complacency and even hypocrisy. Okay, so one of the best definitions I've given about what a hypocrite is a hypocrite is someone who says they are someone that they have no intention of becoming. That's the first observation, right? It's someone who claims to be something that they have no intention of becoming. The second is that we have a tendency to zap people or to zap companies, and what we know is that when we zap companies or people for speaking out on issues when they are not living up to their aspirations, then they stop talking about it. And the moment that we stop talking about it is the moment that social change is taken off the table, right? So that's one of the consequences if people retract. How do we handle this, right? This whole question of a cancel culture or a call-out culture where companies make mistakes, right? So how do we deal with companies that are falling short of their stated aspirations versus those that are not making any public aspiration at all? Yeah, Jennifer, you have any thoughts?
And if you don't mind, I want to go back a moment. So at the beginning of your question, yes. When you ask about some companies are getting involved, other companies are not yet getting involved. I think we have to start from a place of every company on a journey, and they're at a different place. Right. My observation, though, and this really gets more to ESG and what we're seeing around what is a responsible company today. And over the last few years, we've actually begun to see very different trends emerge. So the conversation about corporate purpose, when you think about the Business Roundtable describing a new statement of, you have to think beyond just your shareholder. As I start thinking about Larry Fink at BlackRock and the letters to CEOs that he sends each year with a very specific point of emphasis on what they want to do, I think when you look at investors, employees, and consumers, they are expecting more of companies. And so as a starting point, I think a company has to really be clear, what is my business, what do my diverse stakeholders expect of me, and where do I have the opportunity to make an impact? In this space, I think that we as companies are not going to have a permission to step back. You've got, again, ESG reporting frameworks. People are going to be looking. Michael talked about how J&J is communicating their impact in their social responsibility report. We've done the same. And so I think that there is a mechanism for those companies that have lent their voice to this moment to really be able to say, where do you have the opportunity to make a difference? How are you communicating the progress that you're making? And more importantly, what is your commitment to evolving as you learn to really maximize the impact? But I think it's less about shaming companies and it's helping bring them along. So you as a company, how do you become a role model to be able to then say to folks that are in your value chain, this is what we're doing at Altria. I want to share this with you and love to be able to partner together. It's becoming a model in your community and working with the other companies that are headquartered there. So I think we have to be careful about moving to a cancel culture. I know there's a lot of talk about that. But I think in this moment we also have to understand we are we're entering new territory for many companies that have not been in the social justice space. I have said I am not in. I know what I'm good at. I know what I have an opportunity to learn. I need to learn my way into the social justice space to be able to effectively help what Altria does. We have to be, I talk about humility. We have to acknowledge the fact that we're going to say the wrong thing, we're going to do the wrong thing, but if we are leading and our intentions are pure and clearly understood, we will get grace and we'll have the opportunity to do better and bring people with us. But I think we have to start from a place of honor the impact that people are trying to make. And if there are folks who still are not yet engaging, we have to kind of put our arm around them and give them reason to say, hey, the water's warm, it's okay to jump in, and be willing to commit to learning, as opposed to starting from a place of shaming.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, I think Jennifer really said it quite well. What I would add is, I do think that in my experience, our stakeholders can accept our shortcomings so long as they believe that we are communicating with them honestly and that we have a genuine commitment to improvement and that we are making and they are seeing concrete changes that bring us closer to our aspirations. I do think it's important that our stakeholders, both our internal stakeholders as well as our external stakeholders, they should demand to know our aspirations in this area. Jennifer mentioned the Business Roundtable as an example, purpose of a corporation, that document that came out last year. That was actually built, the framework for that was actually our credo, the J&J credo. So we have a long-standing aspiration there, but as I said earlier, we're a company that is still on that journey. And you shouldn't let a day go by where you aren't being very obvious in your expectations and obvious in the work you're trying to get to the goals that you need to publicly commit to. And I do think that it's okay for companies to fall short. That is what companies do. That's what we as humans do. But so long as we understand the aspiration and so long as we're committed to the journey, then I think that is what people need to see, and I think that's what makes a company sincere and authentic in the journey that we're all on in this particular area.
Okay, here's the question that's coming in from the audience, and that is, how are you handling the racial equity question in terms of diversity and inclusion? Is it a part of the same initiative? Is it a side initiative? Is it under that umbrella? How do you handle this?
For us, we have just begun a conversation. So I put the ESG frame on it. We had just begun to do a materiality assessment to identify the next set of corporate responsibility focus areas that we'll have through 2025. So we literally had just done our interim report, and we had the pandemic, and we found ourselves saying, we've just collected all of this stakeholder input, we're beginning to narrow where our focuses are, and I suspect that expectations of all companies are going to change, including us. And so what we had concluded is we saw some early indicators of what I would say is social justice and equity begin to emerge. So what we have done is, in addition to saying we've got our broader initiative that we communicated in June, which is to address systemic racism faced by Black Americans and advance social and economic equity, but we then said that just can't sit on its own island. It's got to be embedded in the business. So the conversations that we now are having is not only how does it fit within the broader inclusion and diversity framework, how does it fit within our longstanding corporate giving efforts. So we've added 2 new areas to address criminal justice reform and support Black-owned business development. We also said we have existing portfolio of giving areas. How do we embed equity? And so as we're thinking about our materiality assessment, we've also concluded embedding equity across all of those areas that we've identified is important to focus on through 2025 gives us the opportunity to begin to say, what does equity look like for our stakeholder groups that we know matter most to our business? So again, we get it embedded in a very strategic way, and then we can identify what are the metrics, and then how do we begin to hold ourselves accountable. So I think there's going to be a lot of conversation about diversity, equity, and inclusion. There are some organizations that are already there, and I think there are a lot of organizations that are going to be learning how do you embed that into your existing infrastructure.
Okay, good. Here's another question that's come in from the audience, and that is whether companies should be donating, so they say, I feel companies should be increasingly cautious about donations and volunteerism when they lack representation at leadership levels. That's the observation from the audience. And the question is, do you agree with that? That companies should be cautious about donating and volunteerism until they first have diversity in their leadership?
Yeah, I don't think that companies can afford to wait. You know, we have to be able to do these things simultaneously.
Okay.
We're at J&J. As I said, we're pleased with our progress, but certainly have a long way to go. And I do think, particularly on the volunteer side of things, we have, and I'm sure at Altria it's the same thing, but you have employees who are very passionate about the space, and you want to be able to utilize that and harmonize it, and really use it as a jumping off point to continue to not only advance this work on behalf of the company inside communities and other places, but it's also a great way to actually change the culture inside the organization. So I do think that while it may look to be externally focused, by having the company okay this work and really give it voice, it actually it actually has the ability to impact the internal culture of the organization.
Okay, good. Well, we only have 10 minutes left because it's a very tight hour, so I'm going to ask both of you to reflect back on the conversation so far and think about where your companies are on this journey in relation to other firms, and what advice would you offer those who are not there yet, right, in terms of the other people that we have on the call? What advice would you offer them in terms of thinking about change, talking about change, measurement, reporting, or how we hold ourselves accountable?
So I think it
Jennifer, we'll start with you.
Who you are as a company. Where are you already investing? So again, I go back to, if you've got a company purpose and you have identified areas where you want to be able to make an impact, as we think about this, you have to say what makes the most sense for my business, what makes the most sense for my organization and my colleagues,
yep,
and what makes the most sense for my community. And when you begin to go and listen, and there are other stakeholders that folks would probably want to include in the conversation, you want to be able to identify a place to say, again, where do you have the opportunity to make a meaningful difference? And then declare why this issue is important, be very clear how you plan to contribute, identify what success looks like on the back end, and one of the things that I think is going to become increasingly important is to be intentional about who are the other folks you need to be working with. Is it a think tank? Is it a nonprofit organization? I mean, is it folks that are in your value chain? You want to really be able to think about how you connect dots across your organization, how you really amplify the impact of work that you've already said is important. A specific example. Most companies have a commitment around supplier diversity. So if you now hear people talking about, we want to do more to help Black-owned business development, guess what? Connect those two dots together. It supports your aspirations around supplier diversity. When you start thinking about access to capital, well, how do you think about helping with that? If you think about successful programs going from startup to success. That creates a volunteer opportunity. It's a skilled opportunity. Are there folks that can help with financial planning? So it really allows you to say, what are the assets you have as a company that go beyond financial, that are aligned with your interests, where you really can make a clear and lasting impact. And I think that's what's most important. It has to be sustainable over time.
Okay. Oh, that's great. Michael, your closing thoughts. What best advice would you offer those who are on the call? Okay. We need the mic. Michael, check your mic. There we go.
How is that?
Sounds like it.
You hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Sorry.
Yep. All
sorry
good.
about that. Okay. Good. Well, again, thanks, Craig, for the question. Look, I think we can all see these are really big issues, and no single entity, company can, government, et cetera, can solve these challenges alone. And in the same way, there's no single person or group that can do it. What I can say is that it's really, as you go forward, this is not something that should be regulated to your diversity, equity, and inclusion team or your employee resource group or just your executives of color. These are issues that everyone needs to address together. And so I'd make maybe 3 recommendations in this area. First and foremost, you need to figure out how to create an environment in your organization that feels open and safe to have those uncomfortable conversations. Those are the ones that need to happen first and foremost. And that could be being bold and coaching some of your executives on how to be role models for this issue. I can tell you that I believe the moment is so big that individuals, leaders, companies do not want to be on the wrong side of history when it comes to this. So I think there's a real incentive for people who may not have even thought about this area. There's a very strong incentive for them to be out front and to lead here. And it's even better if you can frame it in the values and the principles that you have as a company. That gives it a lot of air to be able to make that sustainable. Second, I would really determine what your company can uniquely contribute to the challenge. Every one of your companies, operates and is in business for a reason, and it's really incumbent upon you to understand what, as a company, can you uniquely do to help in this area. For Johnson & Johnson, it's healthcare disparities because we're a healthcare company, and so we know we've got a tremendous amount of expertise in that area. Find out what your area of expertise is and how you can really make a strong impact. And then finally, be very clear about the metrics. At the end of the day, we talked a lot about actions, but it's also about results and, understanding the fact that you can't be satisfied with, sluggish results. You can't be happy the same way you wouldn't be happy as an organization if your sales declined year on year or your profits declined. Well, it's the same thing when it comes to this area. You want to be able to have, very strong improvement and accelerated improvement year on year, and they should be looked at the same way you look at your P&L. And I fundamentally believe that what gets measured gets done. And so I think with those 3 areas in terms of recommendations, I think it will set all of your companies on a very good path to ultimate success.
That's great. So, well, we still have a couple minutes left to spare, and one of the audience members asked about tools and trainings for your executive team. So what I'm going to say here is that we will share the guidelines that have been developed from Laisha Ward, the VP of External Affairs from Target, and we will post those on the Conference Board website afterwards so that when you go back and watch the broadcast, you'll also have access to those. So with this here, I'm going to give Jennifer and Michael one last reflection, right? Just your closing words here. Give you one chance, and then I will give the announcement about our upcoming webcasts. Jennifer?
So here's what I would say. This is a movement. This is not a moment. And companies have a very unique role to contribute to this movement. They are lending our voices. We are lending our voices. We have to acknowledge that systemic change does not happen overnight, and so we must commit to be in this for an extended period of time. And if we don't do anything else, we need to make sure that what we are doing is consistent internally and externally. So everyone on my team has heard me say a million times, our insides and our outsides have to match, because this is about credibility, this is about trust, this is about humility, and if there is a misalignment of our external efforts with our internal, it will hinder our efforts to really make progress. So I encourage folks to stay in it and do it with grace and humility and an openness to learn.
Great. Thank you. Michael?
No, that was well said by Jennifer. And let me just end where I started by saying that I do think this moment is very different. As I said, this is something I certainly haven't seen in over 50 years. And all of us have an opportunity, frankly, to lead and to influence and to have the impact that perhaps none of us thought would even be possible 6 months ago or a year ago. So I would say just don't let this moment pass. Really understand the degrees of freedom that you have never been wider, and take advantage of it. Take advantage of the tools that are available. Take advantage of resources in terms of people and experience. Build those allies because the momentum is quite strong, and we have an opportunity to continue it and to build it to really see the impact that I think we all want to have in the world, within our companies, with our families, and that is certainly an aspiration worth going after.
That's great. I want to thank you both for joining us here for this special broadcast of the Conference Board on creating space for race-based discussions at the executive level. With us here today, Jennifer Hunter, the SVP of Corporate Citizenship for Altria Client Services, and the EVP of Corporate Affairs and the Chief Communications Officer, Michael Sneed from Johnson & Johnson. So in terms of upcoming broadcasts, number one, this is recorded. You'll find it on our website, and we will have some additional guidelines and resources prepared that are coupled with today's session. And we also have some additional materials and webcasts coming up. We have on August 4th, how will the 2020 census delays affect marketers in 2021? We have consumption in the time of COVID-19 and beyond on August 6th. And understanding equity during the pandemic on July 28th. And you can also go to the website for additional webcasts and opportunities with the Conference Board. This concludes today's session on creating space for executive discussions on race-based issues. There is a webcast evaluation that is available, a link where you can provide feedback on today's session. Your opinion is very important to us in terms of the programming, so we appreciate you taking a moment to evaluate today's broadcast. I'm Craig Carroll with the Conference Board for the Communications Institute of the Marketing and Communications Center at the Conference Board. Thank you so much for joining us.